So anyways, thanks for joining us for the developer teleconference. To go over the things that we're going to cover today. The big one, obviously, is XNAT 165, which we've been talking about for a while, and that finally went out the door. We're going to have a look at some of the features and what's been added in for 165, and why you should think about going to 165, etc. And show off a couple of the cool things that are in there. For some of them that are a little more esoteric, we'll explain what they are. I think it's specifically a PET-MR functionality handling. So, we're going to look at the development roadmap now that we've released 165, what that means for the 1.6 development line, 1.7, 2.0, etc. And you may have seen on the XNAT discussion group that the 2016 XNAT workshop was announced. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And that will should be a pretty big deal. And then at the end, any Q&A that you might have on stuff that we didn't cover, and try to get some answers to the things you might be curious about. So. All right, so 165 went out the door, and that was thanks to our friend James Dixon. That was codenamed Lemon Curd. And then James sent me some lemon curd, and now my household is ruined because my wife and daughter are both huge fans of lemon curd. So that's another thing that we're going to have to deal with, purchasing lemon curd. So this is a maintenance release, and basically we did a lot of security fixes, performance enhancements or fixes or whatever. And we dealt with some of the build problems that we had been having over the last few months related to the deprecation of the Maven 1 repositories at Maven Central. So hopefully we've dealt with those and sort of patched the old Model T up for a little bit. The security fixes range from, most of them were pretty minor. They had not been uncovered in previous security audits. So they were minor enough that they were not getting swept up in burp suite audits and things like that. We have a guy in our lab we call the Chaos Monkey, and he basically did everything that he could to find any holes, and we patched them up as we came across them. Tim Olson did a number of performance enhancements that got rolled in. The area of processing DICOM, managing the pre-archive, exactly the other areas. And obviously the build problems. We are now running our own Maven 1 repo and pointing the builder at that. And we do have a download fix for people who might be behind a firewall. So if you are building and not going out on the internet and need to be able to resolve the jars, you can that, and that's up on our wiki under the troubleshooting section. It's definitely on the discussion group. We also did some UI updates to the administration pages. Like one thing that just has always driven me absolutely nuts is when you add a user on the user administration page, you didn't have to reload the page to see the user. Now the create user dialog is brought into the page as a modal, and when you're done, it updates it. It's such a small thing, and it makes me so happy. Enhancements in managing user groups and data types and things like that. So a lot of the administration workflow is just simpler and cleaner and easier to work with. So PET-MR split functionality. This is an interesting area. PET-MR is not a widely available modality. There's not very many machines in the world right now, but the groups that work with them have particular ways that they want to work with them. And here in our lab, we have a lot of scripts that work on PET data and a lot of scripts that work on MR data, and putting the two together causes a data Armageddon. And so we wanted to be able to split incoming PET-MR imaging sessions into separate sessions where one is a PET and one is an MR. This is complicated by the fact that in a PET session, there's actually some series that are MR modality that contain data relevant to the PET session. So it's kind of tricky. And then other places don't want to create them as unified PET MR sessions and call them XNAT PET MR sessions. And then other groups want to create the combined PET MR session and call it a PET session. So we have ways to handle all of that stuff. So we'll have a look at that. That's the more esoteric. The ability to restrict project creation to admins. This is basically to keep people from monkeying around and cluttering up your data space. And so it just means that obviously only an admin can create a project. I believe the default is still, any valid user can create a project, but it's easy to simple checkbox though. But it's a big security thing for a lot of people. And then scripting and event handling, which we've covered before when we were working on it, but we'll have a look at what the final form of that is like. This is the overall feature is referred to as automation. So I think I will go ahead and get through the development roadmap stuff, and then we'll have a look at this. So for the development roadmap, we now we're done with 165. 17 is the primary development effort. All new development will go into that. So the main goals there are eliminating the builder, providing a war-only deploy. So you don't have to download this builder, then configure things, and then run a build and do the updates and whatnot. That will go away. You'll just deploy an application, and all the configuration will come after that. And then we're working on providing alternatives for the current applet-based tools. If you have a user base that is using browsers, using a browser or browsers that can host applets, they'll be in there for the near future. But for environments where people are using Chrome or for some reason that's not a workable solution, we're looking at, for the short term, very short term, porting over the applet-based tools to just be Java windowed applications. And we are trying to come up with an approach for how we're going to replace those client-side tools in the future. Some of them will be options made available through the browser. So the current image viewer, the Java applet-based image viewer, Flexi viewer, will be replaced by the HTML5 image viewer. But for something like managing DICOM on the client side, we just haven't found a browser-based solution that's workable. We could upload data, but we can't do all the DICOM data handling and anonymization and those sorts of things. So as I said, all new XNAT code is moving to the 1.7 development tip. What that means for the 1.6 Xcode base is that we're only going to be updating with security fixes. Conceivably, if there was something that was super critical, we would do that. But in terms of mainstream XNAT open source development, it will only be security fixes. 1.7 is going to require some changes to module development patterns. We don't know exactly what that's going to be right now. We have an idea, but we're not exactly sure because we have some ways that things will probably change before the release on this. But we will provide migration tools and guides. You can see where it would, because right now modules are essentially archives that are extracted and rolled into the builder deployment structure. Well, if the builder goes away, we can't do that anymore. So we have to have a way that the modules get picked up by XNAT at runtime and integrated into the application. So the next thing beyond that is XNAT 2.0 or XNAT 2 1.0. If the change is radical enough, that might actually be what it is. The reason that this is important right now is 2.0 development patterns and templates. We've had prototypes and mock-ups for 2.0 for quite some time. So all new features that are going into 1.7 are following those development patterns and templates from the look and feel, the types of interactions with users, the fact that it's as much as possible is UI based with REST interaction with the back end. So those design philosophies will be driving 1.7. Many existing features in XNAT will be moving to use those same things, so they'll be changing their look and feel and the way that they're interacting with the back end. And that's to some extent the admin UI changes in 1.6.5 and in 1.6.4 before that as well, is to start using kind of these best practices and patterns that we've got from the 2.0 design exercise. 2.0 may be radically different under the hood. So XFT may be replaced. If you do custom data type development, the idea of creating a schema for the data type may change. We're not sure. That's something that we kick back and forth as to what the appropriate way to handle that is. Looking at different approaches to modular extensions, Java 9 has a whole development effort called Project Jigsaw. That's based on the existing OSGI framework, but should be a lot easier to use than OSGI. And so it would be really nice to look at making XNAT extensions work exactly the same way that every other extension in that in kind of the Java ecosystem would work. As to whether or not the timelines will line up is another matter. So that means the implications for existing modules and customizations of XNAT are unknown. What will happen to your existing module and data types? Will obviously continue to work on 1.6. Our goal is with minimal changes to work in 1.7. For 2.0, it's just hard to say, and that's going to be kind of a cost-benefit analysis on how much is the existing kind of intellectual art worth to preserve, or how much better is the framework that would make that incompatible. We'll have to see. The timetable for this is sometime in 2016, and that is very, very broadly understood. Sometime in 2016. So December 31st, 2016. And that's not a contractual obligation either. So hopefully that's equivocal enough for you. But we have a lot of the code laying around. We have a lot of the things that we need to do and documented in our heads, and we know a lot of the ways to do things and a lot of the ways to not do things. And if a lot of that informs the development efforts, then we have a head start on a lot of the stuff that we need to do to design and get that out the door. So, all right, the next big thing is XNAT Workshop 2016. In case you didn't see the announcement of the discussion group or forgotten, so this is scheduled for the 6th through 10th of June, 2016 here in St. Louis. And if you were at the previous workshop in 2012 or the one in 2010, we had it down at the Farrell Learning Center, which is part of the medical school here, and it will be something similar to that. I don't know if we'll have exactly the same lecture hall type presentation, and that's actually something I'm going to discuss about it here in a moment. But it'll be in the same area, same sorts of facilities and whatnot. We're going to start working on agendas, schedules, etc. for that over the next few months, and we'll stand up a section of the XNAT website specifically for the workshop and be pushing things up to there and provide a way to sort of get a feed of when things are changing and when news is available and whatnot. So things we'd like you guys to think about, and for any users, developers, or anyone else in the communities, what particular areas of XNAT or topics relevant to the domain would you like to see covered? Generally, obviously, it's an XNAT workshop, so things that are relevant to XNAT specifically are going to get the most emphasis, but there are general topics that are related to XNAT that may not be specific to XNAT. So ways to process DICOM, deployment environments, deployment environment management, things like that. And so talking about those things, even if it's not specifically about XNAT, would sort of drive the way that you deploy and manage XNAT within your research environment. So which presentation formats work best for you? In the past we've had big lectures in the main hall, small classes going to break out, hackathons to the side. I think we've even done those as kind of pre-workshop days that focused on particular topic. There's probably other things that I'm not thinking of. I know later on in this thing I mentioned panel discussions, and that could be a really good thing to include. So if there are technical conferences or workshops for other applications or things that you've been to that worked really well for you, we'd be interested in hearing about those and try to make this as productive as possible. Another thing we're really interested in is getting guest speakers or presenters. So if you have a topic, and this goes for this teleconference too, if you have a topic of interest to other users of XNAT, and that could be people who are developing XNAT modules, people who are developing tools that integrate with or work with XNAT, or consume the data coming out of XNAT, or administering an XNAT deploying and managing an overall environment that includes XNAT, then we'd love to hear about that and to be able to make that available to other people. And you can see on the discussion group, when people kind of come in and are not sure the best ways to manage XNAT, to manage their data, to manage the environment, they sort of feel their way through it. And there's people out there who've been doing this for a long time and have a lot of very good ideas about how to manage those environments and integrate it into the overall research process. And so that voice of experience would be great to be able to add. Deployment strategies, how to use Vagrant, Puppet, Docker, etc., whether that's for XNAT or for managing pipeline services or anything else. Module development, particular strategies that you've come up with for module development, and libraries and frameworks to help that out. Data management, so what happens to your data coming in, what happens to your data going out, how do you make it available outside of XNAT? As I said, discussion panels, technical classes that might focus on a particular deep dive in a particular area of XNAT. Sidebar discussion, so integration with other tools, Slicer, OSIRIX, standards, data formats, RFPs, and I always end up, every time I go to something, with people who with XNAT, we always end up talking about something else. I end up on a discussion of some other data format or organization or something like that. So it'd be nice to be able to provide spaces where people who are interested in that sort of thing can get together and discuss those matters in this context. Because getting everybody together is always an opportunity to talk face to face and work through things, and that's really valuable. Now, our last workshop had separate tracks, so we had PIs, administrators, and developers. And we'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on this if you were at the previous one. How well that worked. Do we need more tracks? Do we need to make it more flexible? Or I don't know. To me, it seemed to work pretty well, but I was kind of moving fast, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to what might have gone on elsewhere. So. sidebar discussions. I think that actually that was supposed to get deleted from there. So, all right. So now what I want to do is go ahead and backtrack a little bit to some of the stuff in 1.6 that I talked about. So this is, or I'm sorry, in 1.6.5. So this is 1.6.5, my local dev instance. And there are, I think, two things that are of interest on here. Stop it. I'm looking for it there. Okay. Okay. And remember, if you have any questions on this particular stuff, go ahead and click the Q&A button on the Hangouts thing, and I'll see them pop up on my sidebar. So, okay, so this looks familiar. This is the regular configuration dialog for XNAT. It's gotten to be pretty big. So here's one of our one of the things that I mentioned, the allow non-administrative security projects. Like I said, by default, it's turned on, so anyone can create a project, but just turn off, and now no one can create a project other than admins. So that's easy. So we also have a fairly big enhancement to the series import filters. I don't know how many people are using those out there, but we made some changes to how that stuff works. We can have a look at that, I guess. So here's the separate pet MR. So as I said, here in our lab, we have scripts that work with pet sessions. We have scripts that work with MR sessions, and they didn't do well with the combined pet MR session. So we wanted to be able to separate out pet from MR, and so we added this thing. The select right here basically means that there is no default, no site default, but we can set a site default to create it as a pet MR session, to create it as a pet session, which means basically you'll have a pet session with, dependent obviously on the scan session, 30 to 40 series in the study, some number of which are pet, some number of which are MR, but XNAT will just look at it as a pet session. And we'd also have it separated into pet MR sessions, and that's where things get a little bit tricky because, as I mentioned, even in the pet session, the way that the Biograph MMR Siemens scanner does things, it creates a bunch of pet series, and it creates a few MR series that contain pet attenuation data that needs to go along with the pet data. So we can't just look to see if the series is pet or not pet. We have to look to see if it's pet, if it's MR with some particular attributes. In our case, it's just a series description, or otherwise it goes into the MR session. So you've got that there at this level, and then you also have a separate setting at the site level, at the project level. So you can have things being handled a particular way at the site level, create them as pet MR. And then a particular project says, well, now I want them as separate pet and MR sessions. The cool thing about this is that this works in most scenarios as data is coming into the system. It will not work for the compressed uploader, which is basically an older means of uploading data, but it will work with the upload applet. So when you go to upload to a project that has a separate pet MR session, you load a pet MR session into the applet. what you'll actually see is two separate sessions. And the upload app only allows you to upload a single session at a time. So you'll have your choice of a PET or an MR. If data gets into your pre-archive as a combined PET-MR session, and the pre-archive session builder sees it and it says, oh, but the project that this thing is bound for wants separate PET-MR sessions, it will separate them as it's coming in. If you go from unassigned as a combined PET-MR session, or from one project that allows combined PET-MR sessions, and you assign it to another project that separates them, it will separate them at that point. What it will not do is recombine PET and MR. So if you separated the two, it won't do that. But so you have a lot of ways in which this is managed. Not quite sure how widely applicable this is going to be, but it's people for whom it's meaningful. It's quite meaningful. So we also have on here something else that I mentioned is in the series import filter. We have we've enhanced these to have another thing called a modality map, and we don't have it showing here. I don't have any code right now for it. It's a sample, but the modality map actually was developed initially to drive this this PET-MR session, and essentially what it is a piece of JSON with the with the desired modality for a particular series and a JavaScript expression that can be evaluated to see should this be this modality. So what happens for the PET-MR session split is the list of modalities is PET-MR in default, and it will say, okay, if the modality is PT, or the modality is MR and the series description matches this regex, then this is going to be a PT, and it will route it over there. If it is MR, it will provide some modality equal MR. And you don't even really need to define that, because then you can just say default is MR and everything else will get routed into MR. But it lets you do quite a bit of kind of mapping of the data types. And it also includes the ability to do blacklist and whitelist directly out of that based on these expressions, because you can say exclude and then provide this JavaScript expression that can be evaluated, and if the series DICOM header data maps into that expression and evaluates to true, it's going to be excluded. You can add include, and the same thing, if it matches that expression, will be included. And so you can do a much more complex bit of evaluation on the DICOM, incoming DICOM data than what we've had in previous releases, which are the whitelist and blacklist. And these are simply lists of regexes that are matched against the series description. So for a whitelist, you put in the regexes, and the series description has to match one of these regexes to get through. Or a blacklist where you could put, if it says the series description is there's a lot of PHI in here, we're going to blacklist that and it's not included. So the modality map gives you a lot more functionality that it's, a company more complex. So right, and series import filters along with the PET-MR splits are manageable at the project level as well. So that one on the administration page is the site-wide one. So you could say on a particular site that you don't want any series that match these strings or whatever kind of evaluation. One of the things that I think will be really useful with that, with a site-wide modality map, is there's a DICOM header called burned-in annotation, and generally it's set to yes, no, or true, false. And if that is set in the DICOM header, that means that there are burned-in annotations on that page that most likely contain PHI. And so you can say if burned-in annotations is yes or burned-in annotations is true, put that in your exclude list, and now you've excluded any series that has that burned-in annotation DICOM header set. And so that's sort of a shotgun blast way to try to keep PHI out of your system based on that DICOM header setting. And then so that's that one there, and then the series import filter at the project level here is basically the same thing as you saw. Okay, so now let's look at the cool stuff. The cool stuff is the automation. That stuff's cool. Don't get me wrong. That's awesome. But the other thing too, and I don't think this stuff was in 164. These accordions, were they? No. Yeah. So we had gotten to where the manage thing had gotten to be like 10 scrolls down the page. So we've got these nice accordions in that make things quite a bit easier to see on the page and manage. We're going to eventually move this all off to just a project configuration page. But for right now, this is a nicer way to do it. So the interactions with these things, it's all part of the admin UI improvements that we've done. So those are very nice. Oh, let me show you this just because I might have mentioned that this drives me crazy. So here, and now you see that this comes up in a modal. This is not a browser pop-up. This is a modal. And I can go through and edit a user and save that and quit out, and now we update, and there's my update. It's like I said, it's a small thing, but it's hard to explain exactly how crazy that drove me. So okay, now on to automation. So automation right now, and we put a nice big warning up here. This is it's a brand new feature. We have it in place for some requirements that we have for some of our internal deployments. So to drive some workflow things where we want to have, we want to automate the workflow. So for example, we have data that comes in from the clinical side on one of our systems, and we want to automatically push it off and run a pipeline on the back end to generate this extra data. And when that pipeline is done, we want to do all that with no human involvement. And when that pipeline is done, we will we want the radiologist or the research fellow who's going to be looking at this data to know that that data is done, so they can go in and QC it. So we've got this manual intervention step. Once they're done with that manual QC and they've passed it, we want to look at that QC and say, oh, look, it passed, and turn around. We're going to do something else with data. In our case, we're going to push it to a workstation where eventually it makes its way back to the clinical side. So we've got a couple of events in there that we can handle and we can use to drive this automation and reduce the latency and the human intervention required for the process to happen. So all that said, we got the functionality in there, and it works. And almost as soon as everyone that I walk through this kind of gets the idea that like it needs to do this, it needs to do that, it needs to do the other, and so we understand that it has a bunch of stuff that it needs to do, and we will be actively developing this. This is going to be a core feature in all the upcoming releases. This is going to be integrated more and more into the system. Right now, event handling is fairly exclusively mapped to scripts. So you can have an event that happens to a thing, and what happens after that is a script. We are going to look at a number of other ways to handle events, scripts, pipeline launches, other system processes, things like that. But right now, we can glue everything together through scripts. The scripts themselves, we currently are supporting 3 separate languages, Python, JavaScript, and Groovy. As a note on that, the Python that we're supporting is actually Jython, which is 2.7.2 of the Python spec, and its primary limitation is that you cannot add any Python extensions or modules that rely on native code. So, for example, PyXNAT is a non-starter here for us because it relies on LXML, and LXML uses live XML and another, I think it's GNU library, C or C++ library, to manage the XML transactions. So we can't integrate that. Any pure Python module can be added to a Python environment. The JavaScript uses the JVM integrated engine. So if you're on Java 7, it's Rhino, and Java 8 is Nashorn, and Groovy is 2.4 or something, maybe. I forget now. I need to look at that. But so you can add a script, and the scripts are managed at the site level, and you can add a script in any language you want. Then we have events. Events are maintained in an event repository, but right now they're driven off of, this is a bit of a roundabout thing, but they're driven off of the pipeline name in workflows. So if you are familiar with XNAT workflows, we have a pipeline name in there, and that is used to drive the event names. However, they're managed in a separate event repository, and that's because a lot of the older events that were recorded in XNAT have things like usernames, project IDs, email addresses, all kinds of things very specific to that particular operation, and they're not the idea of an event class. So the way that the event repository is seated right now, there are some default events that we go ahead and we add in. We're always going to add them in. And then it will go look at your workflow table and do a distinct query on them and find all of the events in there that occur more than some set number of times. And it'll say, this seems to happen in the system a lot, and it will drive those into here. So on a new system, you may see events that do have a username in them, for example.
It'll show up in the menu first.
It will show up in the menu?
Like, scroll down. There.
Where? What do you mean?
They don't automatically show up in this list.
They would. They would. If it met the query criteria, it would.
Okay. Does that happen just one time, or does that happen over and over?
It happens only on initialization. When it comes in and it finds that there are no events in its event repository, the system starts up and it's like, how many events do I have? And if the answer is 0, it's going to run through this process. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Now, you could reseed it that way if you wanted to by deleting all the rows from your event repository. But generally, I think that we debated this quite a bit. I think that when you've gone through this process once, I think you'll be you'll have kind of what you need to start. And then, so this right here is pretty close to what you're going to see on an empty system. You know, this is my dev system. I have almost no history on this thing the time I rebuilt this. So you'll see some duplication. So here is modified subject and modified subject, and we like to figure out ways to work around that. But the good thing is you can define your own event. Since these events are living in a whole separate repository, we can create a new event. And we're going to do that in a moment, but I'll go through the rest of this. So scripts live at the site level, and they're only editable and viewable by administrators. That is essentially our security measure. If that is not an adequate security measure for your system, they completely understand if it's not. That's not a point I'm going to argue. Then just don't put any scripts in. That's the security measure. But so right now they are maintained strictly at the site level. So a script is a unique entity on the system. Events, these event IDs, these are essentially event definitions, and we'll have instances of an event. So you added a CT session. Well, you might have if you add 10 CT sessions to your system, you're going to have 10 instances of that event. So the terminology here can get a little weird. So and then event handlers. So really, an event handler, also called triggers, is the association of an event here, a script here, we'll have in a moment, with a particular entity. Right now, we only manage two kinds of entities. That is the site as an entity and projects as entities. So you can have the scope is the site, or the scope is project and then the project ID. So here we only have one project, but if you had multiple projects, you'd say project XNAT 01, XNAT 02, foo 01, foo 02. So you can associate an event with a project and a script. So what happens then is if this event happens to this project, run this script. So in here, I've got an MR session, and I modified my my data type to have an add QC. So that's cool. Now what I would like to do is send an email to someone when a QC is finished. We're done with this QC. Let's let someone know. And this is a very, very simple case, and there will be much richer ways to deal with this later. But now I don't have the add manual QC event here. Normally you do. I deleted it just so I could show you this. So I'm going to find my mouse. Okay. Define an event. I'm going to define an event. There you go. Now you can select from an existing workflow, which let's do that one. This is, I think, the only one that's not already up there is this delete one. So, but I'm going to create a new one that's called Add Manual QC. Like I said, on a standard system, this is going to show up. I just deleted it so that you would see that. You can enter anything for the label. The event ID is the key. Eventually, these are even going to go away in this form, and they're going to be just a system thing that you won't ever see, and you'll create an event label, an event description, some other metadata around events, but the events themselves will be driven under the covers by a more computer-like ID thing, so as opposed to a plain text. So my event is saved, and where'd it go? There it is, down here. Let's sort them. Okay, so now I need a script to run when I go to do this. So I'm going to add a Groovy script. And I've got a cooking show here in this oven. So an important thing about the scripts to understand is that this script is running in the overall class loader context of XNAT. Why that's important is it means that we have everything available to any class that is running within XNAT. So I've got access to XNAT, I've got access to these services, and I can say, I can import them. I say, okay, well, get me XNAT, and I'm going to use this class, and then I say XNAT get mail service, and I define this guy. And if you're not familiar with Groovy syntax, you can do a def, but you can also do a typed def, and that's what I'm doing here to save that. And then this is just my, do that. This is my, the function to send an HTML message. And we have a number of objects that are automatically bound to the script execution context. The user, the current user, is one of those. So this is who the email is going to be from, whoever this user is. This is the to address. Let me send it to me. This is the CC and the blind CC. Here's the subject. And then here is the content of the email. And so these are, again, these are a groovy thing where you can interpret context variables inside of a string. And these are just some of the things that are available. So the external ID is the project. The data type is the data type of the thing acted on. The data ID is the ID of the thing acted upon. And then it's going to show us our workflow IDs. And there are a few workflow IDs that get involved in this process. The groovy, the script execution itself actually becomes its own workflow ID. And the, let's see, I'm not sure if that's quite the right one. That might be. I'm going to delete this stuff because I'm not even sure that those are the right thing. I think we changed those since I last did this script. So let's just make them bullet points so that we've got bullet points. Yes, I like bullet points. Organized. We're in the process of testing this stuff. We made some changes towards the end, and I'm not sure if the script template that I have is up to date with that. Okay, so there's my script. Save it, and now there it is. It shows up here. I can go back and edit it. And we've even got a cool syntax highlighting editor, which is kind of awesome. And we could duplicate it and use it as the basis for another one. The site event handlers, we won't do that through this, but that was basically a demand from CNDA. They have we have a way that we're going to be working our back end where different projects will actually have their own allotted space on a network storage server. And that way each project can essentially be built for its space within our operational context. And so you can have handle the added project event at the site level, and that can launch a script. And what the script goes out and does is everything it needs to do to mount up a new chunk of space for that project on the NFS. So it could be really powerful to use for stuff like that, configuring the system overall, setting up things like that. I need to the project level. So now the project here, and we're going to do event handlers. We don't have any event handlers here. Here's our warning. So just so you know, the event we're interested in is where's my new nuts? Oh, it's using the description. All right. And the script ID. Okay, so now we've got this this event, the script ID, and that's what it's going to do. Cool. And now we go back to my MR session. I'm going to add a QC. And then we're going to series out. How did I miss that? Okay, so that looks pretty good. There's my QC. But over here. Okay, well, here's a cool feature. It's got its own logging. The whole automation system has its own logging. So when something goes wrong, like you forgot to connect to the VPN, so you could hit the mail server, you get all of those things called out separately in there. So you can find anything that's going wrong in your scripting context. Just a moment here. Try that again. Watch, I will miss one of these passcodes again, I promise. I have not done this yet without missing one of those. Oh, hallelujah. That's awesome. Ah. It's still not going through. Well, I would like to show you the actual email, but
You get kind of a workflow sort of entry there in your history too, don't you? Of complete or failed.
yes. Should do that. Let me see here. It should actually be in here, will be here, or associated with the.
You should be able to see it at the session level either way. Well, maybe not.
No, it's not showing up there. There are workflow entries for the script executions. They're kind of maintained off to the side.
Can you go to the administrative view where you can see all the workflows?
Yeah. So you can see here it tells you that you executed that script, and it tells you that it failed. I know that we have anything more on that. So that sort of infrastructure to be able to analyze this stuff is this exactly the sort of thing we're going to be working to build out and make it a lot easier. But I mean, what to some extent, what this does is it shows you that the script did execute. It's just that it can't reach the mail server. That's what this error message is prompted by. It's not as cool as showing you the email message, but I'm on a different Wi-Fi from the subnet where this guy is running. So it won't let me get get onto that. And I could go through and restart Tomcat and reconfigure it, but that part's not interesting. But what it does show you is I'm out and I'm doing the things that are in this script. It's running to this point. It's getting to the email service. It's running to this point and getting to the point where it's sending the email and failing at that point. So, that's showing that it is actually executing this code. So once you kind of get that concept ingrained and realize you can kind of take whatever action you want to whatever event you want and associate that at the project level and be able to eventually we want to have the ability to set things at different levels, at subject levels, at across a range of projects, things like that. But for now, between the combination of the project in which the event occurred and the type of thing that it occurred to and the ID of that thing and the workflow, you can actually use this code to track back and find the context in XNAT. So right now there's going to be work being able to pull all that information out of the back end and make it available to the script. But again, we're going to be working on building up tool sets that you can work with this, you can use to work with the data and make it a lot easier to access things. So we're at the Model T. This is the description I keep using when people want features, and we're at the Model T level, and we can get you kind of cruising around. It's a little bit of an uncomfortable ride. It doesn't go very fast, but it will get you there. And we're working to build a Tesla or a Ferrari or something like that down the line. And at some point, we'll go through the Honda and Lexus stages. It'll be great. So the other thing too is that it is quite feasible to add other languages in here. So for example, one of the things that pipeline developers really want is Bash, the ability to have Bash. Well, in our automation framework, it's just the whole API for managing this stuff. There is the notion of a script runner. And an abstract script runner is something that you can go to the script runner service and say, give me all the script runners you've got. And that's what this has. We don't, Python, JavaScript, these are not hard coded. We go out and we discover what we've got and then populate this off of that and just iterate through. So you create a new script runner, install it into the system, and boom, Bash shows up. We don't do any code validation, so this is not being. I could, put a copy of On the Road in here, and other than being kind of long, the script service will be like, fine, there's your Groovy script. Well, it's not. It's the copy of On the Road. But so we don't do any validation of the code at this level. You do get the language appropriate syntax highlighting, so that's nice. But you end up having to work with the code. Again, it's a little bit of a struggle to do the debugging and get everything dialed in exactly. But once you get it working right, it's in there and improve it. So that is the automation system.
Quick question: Are the events tied completely intertwined with workflows, or do events happen can events happen outside of workflows, or they can kind of completely intertwine?
Right now they're completely intertwined.
Okay.
Our goal going forward is to separate them out, but we are using the workflow definitions as a proxy for events. And so it gets a little weird because what we are calling an event in this context is what the workflow knows as the pipeline name. You see here, none of these are pipelines. There's a pipeline finally. That's probably all you're going to see on the system because I don't run pipelines on this. So we are using that as a proxy for for events. Eventually, we will have other ways of being able to fire events and manage them that will be separate from the workflows. Yeah, we were actually having a whole discussion about this yesterday as to how this is all going to work. So, yeah. Yeah, because eventually what we would like to have is the concept of a workflow and a workflow audit trail, where a workflow is a process and then the audit trail is sort of the particular path through that workflow with any branches or decisions being made and failures or whatever that come out of that being recorded as a whole trail, and then events being things that can happen along the way there. So they're kind of all intertwined with the way that we have it now. This works actually quite well. And what you see in this case is these are basically single-step workflows. When an event happens, it creates a workflow with the status failed or complete. And so, that's it. There is no start, in process, queue, etc. It just is failed or complete. So it's, it really becomes this single instance event together. So yeah, and this stuff will be used, like I said, in our in the tip system that we have. This stuff's going to be used extensively to automate these workflows so that someone can order a session to be imported onto the system from the PACS and the clinical side, and then from the point where that process is started to the point to where someone needs to look at the data, we can just chain all of these processes. So the data is received, great, okay, we're going to now archive it. The data's been archived, great, now we're going to run the pipeline. The pipeline's been completed, great, now we're going to send an email to the radiologist to review the QC data. Then you just sit there and you wait, and then now QC review passed. Okay, QC review is passed, do whatever you do from there. And this whole thing, and we could reduce it to 2 points of human contact, where it kind of down the rosy path, 2 points of human contact, one to order the session transfer, and one to review the data and make sure that it's acceptable. And after that, everything can happen automatically, even though it's a multi-step process. Right now we have someone who has to go in and request the data, run the pipeline, let someone know that the data needs to be reviewed, let the radiologist know that the data needs to be reviewed, find out from the radiologist that they reviewed it, and then take the data and push it back to the system and make sure that it's arrived and stuff like that. So we'll kind of take those steps with all the latency required and take that workload off of the system administrator. And then, yeah, I think that is all we had that we wanted to talk about in this capacity. There are some other cool things happening kind of out of the main XNAT development band that a number of people have been interested in the past, specifically around the capability to create federated a federated XNAT view where two or more systems are sort of federated and grouped by another system by kind of a hub node structure. And there's a project that is being worked on in the UK Ministry of Health Services called DPUK, Dementia's Platform UK, that will do exactly that. It will have a central hub, which is the DPUK hub, and then nodes will be XNATs that exist, that currently exist or will exist at research institutions throughout the UK Medical Research community. So there are projects there, a couple that I'm very familiar with. The 1946 neuroimaging project, which is part of a sub-study on a larger longitudinal study. The GenFi project and GenFi 2, which are research into particular kinds of, actually international study on particular types of early onset dementias, and a bunch of other ones at colleges all over the UK. And the goal of the DP UK platform is to take a lot of that data and make it available, both all of the data from a particular project, and provide the ability to aggregate subjects and kind of sub-cohorts from studies into kind of synthetic cohorts that you could use for other studies. So, for example, if there are 20 universities around the country that are performing research into the various types of dementias, and a researcher comes in and wants to find imaging data within certain parameters from subjects that meet certain demographics and pathological conditions, women between 55 and 60 with an MMSE score of a particular value, and Parkinson's symptoms. They can search across this whole, all these 20 different universities that have multiple studies per university, and find a couple subjects in each one of those research projects and combine them together into one synthetic cohort that represents this population, with a certain amount of imaging data already attached to them, and subject assessors that could help reduce the need to redo studies over and over, and save on scanner time, make it much quicker to be able to pull together a set of subjects for a study, or to be able to check data against other populations, all kinds of things like that. So it's a very cool project, and as part of that, the Ministry of Health Services is contracting out development work for XNAT that they're going to be contributing back into the open source that will do a lot of these things. So federated searches, so you could search from the hub out onto the nodes. The idea of publishing data from the nodes up onto the hub, so that the data would already be available there, sort of in kind of curated packages. So that will be deployed in some capacity by year end, and that functionality will make its way into core XNAT at some point throughout that process. So that's going to be really cool, and that's something that people are constantly asking for. Would be really handy if we could. Sure would. So we've now got some developer cycles to be able to work on that, which is great. And we also are working on. Recently, we've had people asking about getting EEG and MEG data and various other kinds of non-DICOM data into XNAT. And of course, the ability to get Nifty in has been, almost from day one, been an issue. And we've got people here in the lab that are actually working on that. Have actually already solved that problem in other contexts, specifically for Human Connectome project, which is so what Mike Hodge, who's going to be doing, we worked on that Human Connectome project and is going to be working a lot more on Core XNAT over the coming months, is going to be working on. So that should hopefully deal with that issue of non-DICOM data and getting it into the system as well. Anything else cool? Can you think of anything else cool? It's all cool, but like particularly cool.
Themes at all, or is it?
Themes are something that we're working on. So I don't agree with themes, but everyone overruled me. I said they were skins, but are facades. So we're working on the ability to stand up right alongside, or even possibly on a separate server, an entirely separate XNAT UI that will interact with an existing XNAT server strictly via REST. So the way that it's working currently in development is that it's integrated into XNAT right now, in that we are sort of intercepting the root request coming into XNAP, and under particular circumstances, redirecting it into a whole other UI flow. And that UI flow could be whatever you want it to be, because it is literally not at all connected to the existing XNAT UI. So that could be, cool, flashy Ajax widgets or whatever you want to have. One of our uses for it is that we have research fellows who go into XNAT, and they have a very, very limited job description within the XNAT context. So they need to see what data they need to look at. They need to sort of in order of priority, and they need to go in and click on it and look at it and click a checkbox or strike it out. And it's a pass-fail kind of workflow. Is this okay? Is this not okay? And so you could create a fellow workflow. As someone comes in to XNAT, they get diverted to this is look, this is fellow number 1. I'm going to send him to the fellow theme, and they don't even really get a chance to go into the XNAT UI at that point. It sends them directly into their workflow. They can see their work list. They can click on things. They can go do that one thing, and when they're done, they kick back to their work list. And that's just an example of a particular use case that we have. You could have a similar kind of workflow, maybe more with more functions on it for a radiologist. But a radiologist doesn't care too much about coming into XNAT and seeing all of this kind of stuff. But, okay, well, where do I go? I just need to click on that. I just need to see this one session, and it's not here anywhere. So we can you can provide a way to really direct those workflows right to where you want to do it. There's also the possibility of not integrating this into XNAT, but just making it a service off anywhere else, and we'll essentially have a set of templates that you can use as a starting point, and then go from there. And it will have ways to make it easy to communicate with your XNAT, enter in the XNAT address, and then develop your pages and stick it on a web server somewhere, and go. So that'll be a really cool way, I think, to make a lot of this stuff more palatable or more directed for particular audiences.
Try to get that into the 1.7.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be, we'll try to have that into 1.7. That should be very cool if we can do that. And then you would basically, one of the things that 1.7 has different from 1.6 is a preferences service that manages system preferences, obviously, but it will also manage the user and group preferences. So if a user was a member of a group, you could set a theme for that group, and you can set a theme for a particular user. So you could create a portal theme that for your PI to come in and see various things being pushed up to the portal, or you can have this work list theme for fellows. So if someone logs in and they're in the fellow group, boom, they get pushed off to that theme. And a particular user can override it and stuff like that. So I think that'll do a lot to one of the issues that we always have with XNAT is my PI doesn't even look at XNAT because it just doesn't know what to do with it, doesn't want to know what to do with it, so basically you have someone working as a secretary as opposed to making this stuff easy to access for the people who could really do a lot with that information at their fingertips. So if you think about it, you could do a lot of stuff with graphing packages and things like that to do information and data analysis. So I think that'll be a really cool way for people to provide their own custom functionality without having to get kind of down and sticky in the Java side of things. Then that's any last things that anyone could think of that to talk about? All right. Well, we don't have any questions. I don't see any questions. If you have a question, the Q&A thing on the display, but I don't see any. So, where's my? Hold on, I get my slideshow control jobber here. Okay, so the next teleconference right now is scheduled for the 21st of October. We will see what we've got to present at that point. And if we have something worthwhile to present, or someone has get a good volunteer presentation, which would be great, we will do that. If not, we'll let you know early if we're going to have that or not have it. But that's the current scheduled one. So look for announcements for that and call on information on XNAT discussion and the water cooler blog and the Twitter feed. If you have any suggestions that you'd like to see for a presentation you'd like to see, or have something that you think would be good to present, we'd love to hear from you. Well, one thing, sorry, I meant to say back on the workshop discussion is we're going to try to set up some feedback forms on the workshop wiki pages so that you could submit suggestions and have discussions about things that we'd like to see there, and sort of meta from that. We ran into some bugs on our wiki. We've been trying to open up the Jira, our bug tracker, and our wiki for community sign up so that people can get onto Jira and you can file a bug directly in the XNAT project. You can track and watch and vote on bugs. Like if you've been on any open source project where they have that sort of thing, it's very cool, and people can, if you've had the same bug as someone else, you can add extra information that you might have found about what caused that bug to happen. But we've run into a bug with our registration, and it just doesn't work right. So try to get those things ironed out. We have to get IT involved and redeploy things to production. So we try to make that a bit more of a community resource as opposed to just sort of a read-only thing. The version of this presentation is going to be on the XNAT YouTube page. We actually have our own YouTube page now. And you look on here for the URL, and I'll post this PowerPoint on the blog entry for this. And we also have the Google Plus page, which hopefully you might have seen to get to this to the teleconference today. So we're trying to keep those updated and start putting some more content up on them to publish them. And that'll include probably some screencasts to walk through some of the the issues around scripting and anything else. And if you have suggestions, send us an email or things like that. Get those all together. All right, that's it. So thanks for joining us today, and hopefully it was useful. If you have any comments, get back to us. And until then, we will talk to you all later.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.